Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott and I've been playing Saints Row 2022. Now, we always knew this was going to be one hell of a divisive installment to the franchise. Saints Row is one of the most talked about IPs overall, and there's a hell of a lot to break down. Saints Row itself has had a hell of an identity crisis across the 2000s, the 2010s, and it's kind of resulted in two different identities that you can point to and go, I like that era of Saints Row and I don't like that era, i.e. the early games were a lot more like GTA, they were a lot more grounded, especially Saints Row 1, and about half-ish, let's say, of Saints Row 2, before Saints 3 and 4, and especially Get Out of Hell, just went as ridiculous as possible and as over the top as possible. That meant that you had entire swaths of the fandom just say, look, this isn't for me and I'm okay. And Get Out of Hell and Saints 4, as far as I know, didn't sell as well as Saints 3. Now, Saints 3 is my personal favorite, even though I've been with the franchise since the beginning, and I think it's worth mentioning all of this because you've still got members of the same dev team going back to the IP in 2022 after numerous delays and quite a lengthy development period to try and make the IP work again in 2022 for a whole new audience. Now, a lot of people, when they first saw the reveal trailer for this, just felt quite cringed out by the way the characters were written and the general tone. It was very post-MCU, very quippy. Every single character is taking every part of the scenario they're in super lightly, and it was that whole thing of, you know, is this game going to just be another throwaway, Forspoken trailer-style quip fest where nothing really lands? Sadly, yes, that's entirely what this is. It's not to say that parts of the gameplay aren't fun, that you can have fun zooming in, shooting some dudes in the face, doing some over-the-top anarchic mission design like riding on the tops of cars, as the game has quite a lot of gimmicky missions, whether that's aping the likes of Mad Max or just doing things like where the entire city is all of a sudden a LARPing session where everyone's in character and you're doing fake punches as you knock people out from slightly further away and then they jump back like they've just been hit with a giant haymaker. Sadly though, it is the core of this that just does not feel that good. It's almost a detriment to the fact that Volition or Deep Silver put all of the games on Xbox. You can go over to an Xbox right now and play the entire history of Saints Row, right back to the original game, which I've been doing across the last week. I've been diving back into the old series to just see how it compares in terms of shooting models and how the overall feel of the series has advanced over time. I would still point to Saints 3 as some of the best gunplay that the franchise has ever had, because the first thing that hits you with this game is just how twitchy and awkward and awful a lot of the combat feels. There's a lot of changes here that I think are worse, like the fact that you can't do as many finishing animations as you want to in terms of melee attacks. You've got to build up. Now, if you want to do one of those fancy moves that you would do in Saints 3 and 4, where you run up to a guy and do a suplex or a DDT or a giant flying dropkick or whatever, they are now on a meter that you've got to build up by doing gunfire in general. Then you'll get one melee attack and you can do that. You can kick as much as you want, but it's a pretty naff feeling kick. It barely connects with enemies. It doesn't send them flying. They've also removed the ability to take a human shield, which kind of removes a tactical layer of third-person shooting in itself. Grenades are also no longer a thing that you can just throw. You have to build up to them. There's a whole skill system here now, which means you have to build up and unlock the ability to throw grenades. Which is also in the skill system one of the parts that doesn't make any sense. Like you're just randomly unlocking a flaming punch or the ability to do a few cartwheels with twin pistols, or just nothing around that whole thing makes sense. It feels like they're trying to straddle that line between semi-realistic protagonist and semi-realistic look and over-the-top ridiculousness that the franchise went into as it developed over time. So the thing to drill down on here is that nothing really makes sense. The overall setup here, and it feels like the reason that Volition didn't put out the story trailer until very recently, and even in the story trailer for the game there was very little discussed in regards to what's happening here, because the setup makes no sense. The general concept is that you're a bunch of students trying to pay their rent, and each one of you is from a different gang, and you're just sort of getting in there as the boss. You're just someone who wants to start the new version of the Saints because you tried working for a different military corporation and you want to use that experience to start a different gang. On paper, that's a fun idea. The idea of a few students, struggling to pay rent. It's definitely a relatable concept that a lot of people that Volition are trying to target can relate to. However, the way that the boss is written and the way that everyone is written, like I said, it's Quip City, and that also means that no one takes any scenario remotely seriously. It's just an excuse for another quip. It's just an excuse for another, wait, what, a minigun? Oh, sure, yeah, I guess we'll use that. It's just kind of all over the place. And like I said, the way that the boss is written infers a history to that character that isn't in this new version of the game. But in the timeline, they're referring to events that happened way before the game. So it's like, were you like this insane killer before you came in? Did you have a whole past before you came in, before we saw what you did with the military, before you then embarked on the events of the game? It just doesn't really make any sense. They're sort of referring to this overall history of anarchy and over-the-top shenanigans and everything that also kind of clashes with the semi-grounded idea of a bunch of students trying to pay their rent. This goes hand in hand with the fact that the world itself barely makes any sense. There's very little police presence. There's no real wanted system here. You know, the gangs will sort of notice you if you're shooting the place up, or if you're doing open world stuff like in GTA, like in Saints Row. But there's no real sense of place. There's no real sense of weight or drive to anything that you're doing. It's just a selection of arbitrary missions with arbitrary mission design that you've played a million times over, especially in this genre, you know, across the last 10 years or so. One thing that I want to mention in regards to the way that everyone is written is that it's the whole script is just trying to remember that whole era. It was like the sort of the late 2000s when a bunch of different devs thought that swearing was cool. It was just this sort of hangover from the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was just every other game had just way too much swearing in it. But you just have exchanges between characters, Kane and Lynch style, where every line of dialogue is just like, should we do this? Yeah, that sounds awesome. Okay, yeah, let's do it. And it's just like, what are you guys writing? Like, who is this for? Is this like attempting to sort of target the kids, whilst also trying to bring in veteran fans of the franchise? Because it doesn't feel like it has that much purpose to it one way or the other. It just feels like it's trying to be a bit extra, a bit over the top, a bit ridiculous, and it kind of just feels lame as a consequence of that. It just feels like a bunch of ideas thrown at a wall, trying to make Saints Row work in 2022, and falling apart entirely. Graphics are another thing that I need to highlight as just something that is just terrible. I mean, I get that the game has been in development for quite some time. Like I said, there was a delay to get it out. But you know, when you look at a set of, you look at some graphics in a game, let's say sometimes it's the Unreal Engine, and you get that first texture pass where everything looks rubbery and it's lacking detail, and then it pops and everything is there as it should be. Halo used to always do this. It feels like that. It feels like you're always waiting for another texture pop to come in that never arrives. It just looks like a bunch of, especially NPCs, look like a bunch of rubber people, and everyone other than the main cast just does not look good. Which is a stark contrast to the fact that Saints Row 3 Remastered just dropped a couple of years ago, and that thing still looks brilliant. The lighting looks solid enough in this, and sometimes you do some levels that are, you know, entirely in red light or blue light. There's different things that are trying to accentuate the graphics engine, but it just does not look good overall. The version of the game that I played thankfully was patched maybe 4 or 5 days before you see this, but it did mean that I was playing it for a couple of nights where it was just graphical bugs and glitches galore, some of which did not get patched out and are worth pointing out. In missions, you might just get an instant fail where it pops up and says, this character has died, even though you didn't do anything. Maybe it goes to that after it's trying to load a cutscene. I had the game tell me that I was out of bounds, even though I was on the specific road it was telling me to follow. It was like, return to the mission area. I was like, I am in the mission area. It's a bunch of stuff from a bygone era, not really touched up in a way that makes you want to engage with it in any meaningful capacity. It's just Saints Row, like with all the style, all the individuality that was taken out of those later installments, when it felt like Volition were trying to distance themselves from GTA. As much as you can say that you prefer the old school Saints Rows, and I totally get that, I like just how much Saints Row 3 was self-aware as a video game, where in that opening set piece, as you're stealing various money from the bank heist and everything, you have characters asking, how long's our chopper going to be before we can escape? And someone else is like, I don't know, like 2 waves of goons, 2 waves of enemies? Okay. Like, there's that whole self-aware thing where they are video game characters in this world. We're all self-aware about just how far the open world genre had got to that point, and you might as well poke fun at it. You might as well make it so that you can just jump through a window and hijack a car rather than pull the guy out the door. It always felt like Saints Row got that, and this game kind of doesn't. It doesn't really have much of an identity outside of just being as over-the-top and pointless as possible, and hoping that that in itself becomes an identifying factor. For me, at least, it very much was not. In terms of new things, there's very little. Like I said, it kind of feels like they're trying to just serve you up a Saints Row, like a meat and potatoes Saints Row, just like we used to do them. Kind of trying to walk that line between Saints Row 2 and 3. And to that regard, they've added some car combat stuff, like they showed off in the trailers, the fact that you can hold triangle or Y and get out on top of a car so you can shoot some dudes around you when you're in the middle of a car chase. However, this doesn't apply to every single vehicle. You can only do it on cars that have roofs. And I know that sounds like a stupid thing to point out, but Just Cause already did this. Just Cause, one of their signature mechanics used to be that you could get out of any car, whether any vehicle, even if it was a plane, and your character, Rico Rodriguez, would find some way, something to stand on, so you could do that, in motion set piece. That's not here. If you're in a van or you're in a car that has a roof, you can hop on top. Nothing AI drives the car, so you're sort of just letting off the accelerator when you do that. You can take a few pot shots and then jump back inside the car. But if you're inside a vehicle that doesn't have a roof, the command prompt just doesn't work. Alongside that, you have the ability to sideswipe enemies where you press left or right with square or X. Doesn't really have much impact. It's just an additional wrinkle to car combat that can send some enemies flying in a way when the physics bug out and they really send a car flying across the city. That's good fun, but it feels like the kind of thing that might just get patched as, Volition take more time polishing this thing up post-launch. After all of that, let's talk about some positives, because the thing is, Josh has been playing some of this as well. He got his review code after me. I'm doing the main review, and me and Josh will talk about Saints Row on upcoming podcasts and upcoming coverage. He could get away with just how bare bones the general feel of the game was. Like we both sort of said that, this is a fun enough game where you're holding left trigger and you're using the right trigger to shoot people, you're busting out some skills, you're throwing some grenades intermittently whenever you can build them up, and you can kind of have fun in that regard. However, for me, if I'm reviewing it, I don't think that is a worthwhile thing, to hang the whole game on. I get that you can just, it's a fun enough way to spend an hour in an afternoon. But it feels more like Agents of Mayhem, which was the last game from these guys that they attempted to do after the end of Saints Row, where that game was just a bunch of stuff to do. The combat model was satisfying enough, it was fine enough, but you weren't doing anything outside of that was very satisfying in itself. Here, the extra activities that you have are you can take photos of various collectibles, various items around the city to put back at your home base, and you also have a whole bunch of the side missions that you already know from Saints Row, the likes of the insurance fraud stuff. However, like I said, because of the way the script is written and the way that no character takes anything seriously, and every character just kind of comes across as an old person writing a young person, I didn't care about doing any of the extraneous stuff. It just felt pointless, especially when my characters were just talking about, hey, let's go do this, and then we can get home and do karaoke. And I'm like, who are these people? I've never met a single person that in their circumstance would be talking like this. As I record this, I realized that I ended up becoming negative again. I was trying to cover some positive stuff. It is fun enough to shoot some dudes. The main positive here is that the character creator from the other games is still back. That idea of Saints Row having one of the best character creators in gaming is still here. I'm reliably informed by my female friends that a lot of the fashion choices here do feel notably outdated. I wouldn't know, man in a wrestling shirt. But still, the overall feel of your character does feel individual. It does feel like you can put enough time into the creator and make someone that feels like you. There's a good range of facial expressions and different over-the-top ways that you can design your character. If you want to have metallic green skin, you totally can. However, I do think it's a missed opportunity in terms of the voices that are on offer, that they're all just regular voices. Like there is an over-the-top South American accented woman that you can pick, but there's not really anything in regards to the Nolan North pack that was in Saints 4, or just the Goblin pack that was in Saints 3, where you'd have characters talking normally to your boss, and you would just respond with blah, blah, and then they would go back to whatever they said. I do like that you can change your entire character's look whenever you want. You don't have to go to the clothing shops anymore, but that is very little in regards to a positive overall. That's, the character creator is solid enough, and you can make someone like you always could before, but we're just talking about things that the franchise has done before very well. If we talk about what it brings to the table now, then you've got all the bland mission design, you've got the terrible writing, you've got the world that makes no sense, you've got some terrible checkpointing in those missions. It's very hard to stay positive with this game. There's very little that I would recommend. I would only point you to other Saints Row games. In conclusion, I feel sorry for the people working on this game. I feel sorry for the Saints Row fandom. I'm part of it. I've grown up with this entire franchise. I remember it right from back at the beginning. And like I said, I would just recommend you go back and play those games. Saints 1, Saints 2. Saints 2 has a massive following, and I, for one, love Saints 3. I just think that if you want some Saints Row, you are better off playing Saints Row 3 Remastered or Saints Row 2 on something like the Xbox backwards compatibility, where that game has a better frame rate and auto HDR, etc. What Saints Row's 2022 version brings to the table is very, very little, unless you connect with the way the characters are written, and you just can kind of have fun with just how over the top and ridiculous everything is, where nothing really makes sense, and the game is just saving you stuff up, but not in a way that feels like there was an overall purpose to it. It just kind of feels like it's torn between various identities. Saints Row's, twin identities in itself, also trying to appeal to a youth demographic, trying to bring in the MCU-style wider comedy stuff that the likes of Forspoken have tried and failed at, and overall, it's just a bit of a mess. You can push buttons and shoot dudes, and that's satisfying enough, but at some point, it's just not enough to justify the price tag. So I didn't have that much fun with this, to be honest. And if we're going star ratings, I'm going to give it 2. I just, like I said, you can kind of have fun with it, but I just think overall it's a bit of a failure in regards to reviving Saints Row. But I'm curious what other people think. If you pick up this game, let me know what you think down in the comments below. I don't know what any other reviewers are saying about it yet. Maybe it'll go down better at other outlets. For me, I didn't have any fun, and I would recommend the other Saints Rows instead. For now, though, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, and I will catch you next time.